Opa, 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 ahí estamos. ¿Cómo están? ¿Todo bien? Tanto tiempo, acá volvimos. Estamos teniendo unos cambios técnicos, así que por eso estamos con una intro eh, que por el momento va a ser esa. La que todos conocen, pero bueno, salimos así. ¿Cómo andan? ¿Bien? Así que nada, tenemos otra noche de vivo acá en Ultimate con un invitado, la verdad que grosso, importante en este último tiempo en este mundo Motu que muchos estamos siguiendo. Así que nada, de a poquito se nos van a ir sumando nuestros amigos que ya conocemos. Tuvimos el partido de Argentina-Venezuela, así que de a poquito la gente se va a ir sumando. Así que bueno, ¿les parece? Vamos a ver quién tenemos acá. ¿Qué hace Gus?
No, feliz de la vida. Me mataste, cuando vi la intro ahí casi me muero de la risa. No, es buenísimo. Como que tenemos derecho, problemas de copyright de nuevo por pasar la intro, ¿no?
Tenemos problemas con nosotros mismos. Todo es posible.
Sí. Muy divertido, no, muy divertido. Te luciste, Sergiño.
Pero bueno, es Ultimate. Si no pasan estas cosas raras, bizarras, no seríamos nosotros, muchachos.
Totalmente. Alguna vez tendríamos que hacer un compiladito. Bueno, siempre decimos vamos a hacer compilados con cosas. Hacer un compiladito con las cositas así que nos fueron pasando, las de cancelación en el momento que están en el vivo esperando ahí atrás, que no que se me rompió la que no. Hay cada historia.
Hoy tuvimos problemitas técnicos con la compu. Charlie también me parece, así que estamos complicados, pero bueno, nada, acá disfrutando un poquito. Vamos a saludar un poquito a la gente que nos está visitando. José Rosario, buenas noches. Mati, buenas noches. Sergito, acá estamos de nuevo. Gabriel, acá, preparado también.
Ya sé, Gabriel.
Oscar, el amigo Oscar.
Este nombre es mío, Oscar the Viant. ¿Cómo te va, Keño?
Obviamente. Acá mi amigo Johnny. Pronto va a haber novedades con respecto a remeras, así que van a estar atentos. El amigo Lobo también, presente. Así que bueno, como les dije, a poquito...
Que la primera vez caí como un pescado. Alguien que había dicho. Era...
No recuerdo. No recuerdo, la verdad. Puede ser, todo es posible. Así que bueno, como les dije anteriormente, seguramente los chicos se van a ir sumando de a poco. Tuvimos un partidito lindo recién, Argentina-Venezuela. La despedida de Messi jugando de local por los puntos. ¿Cuánto ganamos? ¿3-0 o 4-0? 3.
3-0, sí.
3-0, perfecto.
Así que bueno. Un minuto antes terminó. Che, bien. El invitado que tenemos hoy, creo que imagino que algunos lo conocen o no lo conocen. Lo que tienen que saber es que escribe casi todos los minicomics. Eso es una gran duda también, si los escribió todos o algunos, porque la verdad yo los tengo todos, pero como no los saqué del blister, solamente tengo abierto que es el único que saqué del blister de los Origins.
Yo tengo varios acá.
Varios. Pero nada, me gustaría saber una cosa que me gustó mucho, es esto, la parte de atrás de los minicomics. Pero bueno, Joshua también tiene su carrera escribiendo un montón de cosas. Marvel, trabajó con Spielberg, trabajó haciendo Ben 10. También a mí me interesa mucho de la revista
Heavy Metal.
También me gustaría mucho que nos cuente un poquito. Gabriel Luque, sí. Tengo el buzo de Sly.
Y es un gran aficionado obviamente por la ciencia ficción, así que debe tener sus lindas historias de... debe tener un montón de historias, así que... A ver.
Las dos.
¡Apa! Te metí así de una.
¿Cómo andan mis amigos?
Bienvenido a la Argentina, Charlie, ¿no?
Bienvenido, amigo.
¿Todo bien?
Fabuloso.
Todo bien.
Fabuloso. Ahora que nos vemos, mucho más mejor. Así que tuvo incidentes hoy con su vida privada para llegar a la cancha.
Un poquito, pero bueno, ¿qué va a hacer? Lo vimos en familia acá, no pasa nada. Saludos a la gente ahí tanto tiempo.
Así que bueno, ¿les parece si le vamos dando entrada a nuestro invitado? Así no lo hacemos esperar tanto. ¿Sí?
¿Cómo no?
Gus Weber.
No, Sergio Martín. ¿Por qué no lo decimos a Charlie Messico, que hace tiempo que no nos tira una introducción?
Sí.
Sí.
Bueno, vamos a darle la bienvenida a nuestro invitado, que nos está dando unos lindos gustitos contando historias de nuestros personajes favoritos. Así que le das entrada a Bowser.
Dale. Bueno, amigos, le damos la... Ah, perdón.
Dale.
Le damos la bienvenida a nuestro amigo Joshua Sky.
Hola, amigo.
Qué introducción, Sergio. Josh, thank you so much for doing this. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Muchas gracias. Gracias por invitarme. Lo aprecio mucho. Josh, I usually like to do the first question on the show. Then again, we have our own questions that we have in our heads, and then we'll take some from the audience. And it's a ping pong, right? But I usually like to start with the first question. It's how did you start? What were your beginnings? How do you become the Josh, this guy that we're getting to know lately in this last few years? Como dije siempre, me interesa mucho hacer a veces la primera pregunta de cómo empezaste, cómo fue tus inicios y llegaste a ser el Josh Sky que estamos conociendo en los últimos años.
Sure thing. First off, thanks again for having me, guys. It's really an honor. I'm a big fan of the Argentinian community and the artists coming out of Argentina as well. There's so many really amazing creatives from your region, so it's truly an honor. And it's also a part of the community that I don't know a lot about, so I'm just really excited to be here to learn more myself. So just to tell you guys my origin story, my Motu origin story is I grew up in Maui, Hawaii, and I loved science fiction and fantasy and comic books. And of course, I also grew up loving Motu as well. Getting certain toys and comic books and science fiction books was hard because I lived on an island, right, in the middle of the Pacific. So anytime I got something, it was like, oh, it was like a big deal. I'm sure certain things from the U.S. are like that in Argentina and vice versa and stuff. But I always I played Dungeons and Dragons and played video games, and I'm really a lot like you guys, really, in the sense of the stuff that you guys love. And I ended up going to, and let me know if I'm going too fast, if you want me to slow down, because I know you have to do translation.
Oh, no worries. I take notes. I'll just translate it.
Okay. So when I graduated high school, I ended up moving to Brooklyn, and I lived in my uncle's attic, and I went to Brooklyn College, and I was a film and screenwriting major, and then I remember I started doing internships, and I interned at the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. That was a big deal at the time, and I broke in. And I remember after I concluded there, this kid was trying to intern at Marvel Comics in New York City. Hola. So what happened was it didn't even occur to me. I'm like, oh yeah, we live in New York. Marvel's here. And I ended up interning at Marvel, and that was my first job out of college. And I had written a lot during college too, and all sorts of screenplays and short stories. And what happened was when I was at Marvel, I worked there for 5 years, and I was in licensing and branding, but I really wanted to write. And I did get to write a little bit. I got to write for Marvel.com and a few other places. And I ended up getting a TV writing agent, a script writing agent, and they said, you need to move to Los Angeles. So I did. And Marvel was bought by Disney, and that was a few years. I moved there a few years later after that happened. So Disney needed people from Marvel who understood the brand to help them work in publishing. And I did that for a while. And then what ended up happening was I wrote for some TV shows like Ben 10 and stuff like that. And for Marvel web series and a bunch of places. And then eventually what happened was someone I knew at Mattel, and for years I'd known some people at Mattel, and of course I would have loved to write for any of the Mattel brands, but I kind of forgot about it. And I had written some science fiction stories, and I was getting a lot of science fiction published in different internet venues. And someone at Mattel had read a science fiction story I wrote, and they said, "Hey, would you be interested in writing for He-Man?" And I didn't even believe them when they told me this. I did not even believe them. And so many things don't even work out in Hollywood that I just said, sure, of course, me and every nerd under the sun would love to write for He-Man. So they set up a meeting. I had this meeting and with some lovely folks at Mattel, and they said, okay, great. Well, we need like this batch of issues. There's like 10 or 12 or 13 issues. And the first one is due on this date. And I said, okay. And they logged off. And because it was during COVID when that happened. And when they logged off, I looked around my office and I was like, did I just get He-Man? I felt like someone had just handed me keys to a Lamborghini and walked away. That's how I felt. That someone had handed me keys to a Lamborghini. And to wrap up the story, what I'll say is, it was a very bizarre experience because I was collecting Origins before I'd ever known I was going to work on Origins. So I'd never had an experience of collecting a toy line and then all of a sudden to actively be working on a toy line. And what I'll also say is the reason the first script sounded familiar, like the reason that script date sounded familiar was because it was the date of my wedding, right? It was like the week of my wedding. And I didn't want to complain and I didn't want to say anything. The Mattel people have been very understanding, but I didn't want to screw it up. So there are pictures of me at the wedding rehearsal in Mexico, because that's where we got married, where I'm working on my first He-Man script. So anyway, that's the origin story of how that happened.
All right, I'll go ahead and translate them out. That's amazing. And I already have sub questions about all of this right now. So I'll go ahead and translate this.
Sure.
Okay, here I go. Bueno, primero que todo, gracias por invitarme, un honor. Soy un gran fan de los argentinos y los artistas argentinos. Muchos artistas vienen de su región. Y aparte me encanta porque puedo aprender yo mismo también acerca de ustedes y su comunidad de coleccionistas ahí. Bueno, mis orígenes, les voy a contar mis orígenes con Motu. Yo soy originalmente de la isla de Maui, de Hawái. Siempre fui aficionado a la ciencia ficción, a la fantasía de los cómics. Crecí amando Motu. Era muy difícil conseguir cosas en la isla y ahí me dijo, bueno, seguramente imagino para ustedes también en Argentina algunas cosas importadas desde los Estados Unidos. Así que cada vez que conseguía algo era como un wow lo que conseguí. Muy fan de los videojuegos, Dungeons and Dragons, Calabozos y Dragones, ¿no? Si no me equivoco. Igual que ustedes, me imagino. Soy uno más de ustedes. Cuando terminó la secundaria, se mudó para Brooklyn, donde consiguió un nivel de estudios mayor en escrituras de guiones. Trabajó, hizo una pasantía para Jon Stewart. Dice que un flaco que conocía a él se puso a trabajar haciendo también una pasantía, así un internship, como lo dicen en Estados Unidos, para Marvel. Y dice, bueno, no se me había ocurrido. Yo estoy en Nueva York viviendo, Marvel está acá en Nueva York. Así que bueno, nada, de una cosa llevó a la otra y llegó a conseguir hacer unas pequeñas historias para Marvel. Y de ahí empezó, bueno, trabajó con Marvel durante 5 años haciendo una parte que se llama Licensing and Branding, que estuve leyendo justo de él para preparar un poquito para la entrevista de hoy, pero quiero que me explique un poquito más cómo funciona el sistema de Licensing and Branding con el que trabaja. Bueno, trabajó haciendo cosas para Marvel y Marvel.com, perdón. Se consiguió un agente de televisión para escribir guiones. La gente le recomendó que se mudara para Los Ángeles. Unos años después, cuando Disney compró Marvel, ahí decidió mudarse, ¿no? Trabajó en series como Ben 10 y otros shows de televisión, la web series de Marvel también. Ya me estoy quedando sin voz. Eventualmente, alguien que él conocía en Mattel le escribió y le preguntó si le gustaría escribir para Mattel. Y él dijo, me encantaría trabajar para cualquier línea de Mattel. Porque, bueno, él durante ese tiempo seguía escribiendo pequeñas historias, cosas para internet sobre sci-fi. Y bueno, le escribieron de materia y le preguntaron si quería escribir He-Man. Setearon un llamado con él, era durante la época del COVID. Hizo el llamado y dice, la verdad me quedé medio como no creyendo lo que estaba pasando, porque dice que la charla fue muy corta, le dijeron necesitamos 11, 12, 13 guiones escritos para esta fecha. Le dieron una fecha límite y cortaron. Y dice, me quedé en mi oficina así como, y me dije, conseguí He-Man, o sea, me siento como me dieron las llaves de un Lamborghini. Dice, fue muy bizarro porque yo ya coleccionaba muñecos de He-Man Origins antes de empezar a trabajar con ellos. Y dice, y lo que sí me sonaba mucho la fecha del primer deadline que le dieron para presentar el primer guión, y era que era la fecha de su casamiento. El mismo día que se casó, el día que tenía para presentar sus primeros guiones de He-Man. Y dice, bueno, no la quiero cagar, obviamente. Y bueno, dice que en las fotos de su ensayo de casamiento, que fue en México, él era cuando estaba escribiendo justamente para He-Man.
Bien, mirá. Preguntale, Gus, así
señor.
volviendo a la infancia de él.
Sí.
Como él estuvo contando, ¿no? Como hizo una especie de introducción que le costaba conseguir algunas figuras, ¿no? Motu. Bueno, contale un poquito que nosotros acá en el país teníamos la empresa Top Toys que se encargaba que tenía ay, ¿cómo se llama? Bueno, la marca, el permiso, ¿cómo es que se llama?
La licencia.
La licencia, ahí está. Que si bien nosotros, si bien la línea completa creo que son como 60 figuras, ya no me acuerdo, acá solamente se llegaron a fabricar 39, ¿no? Y 40 con el camo. Bueno, contale eso y él cómo lograba conseguir algunas figuras. Si llegaban cierta cantidad ahí a la isla o alguien que viajaba se las podía acercar. Como para comenzar un poquito
Dale.
con el tema
Voy
de
a
la
agregar
infancia.
también, voy a agregar una partecita a ver qué otras líneas, aparte de Motu coleccionada, ¿no?
Dale,
Porque
dale.
que estamos más o menos, seguramente Mego andaba por ahí, ¿no? Algo de G.I. Joe por ahí. Josh, okay, good deal. So here's the question from Sergio, and it's part of the couple follow-ups that I had for you on your first answer. You mentioned when you were a kid, it was hard to get toys, and so again, we wanted to know what were the toys that you collected when you were a kid and that were hard to find. Also, for example, down here, out of the regular Mattel line, there were about 60 figures. Down in Argentina, I'm sure you know, we had Top Toys who got the license to produce and manufacture He-Man in Argentina, and we did. We have some of the rarest ones like the Camel Can, Cobra Can, and then we produced about 40 figures with the Camel. So again, first of all, what were your toys when growing up, and how were you able to find them and obtain them if they were like, again, hard to get? You are muted, Josh. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Again.
You're there. You go.
Yeah, there we go. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. So based on when I got into He-Man, it wasn't while it was actively on TV completely. It was like the tail end of it, just based on my age when I was born, right? So like I had like a viewfinder, and like the action figures I would get would be from like when kids were done with their action figures and stuff, right? Like I remember one neighbor brought over a Mosquito action figure, right? And I remember being like, I remember he was showing me the blood pumping action, and I was like, can I borrow that? Like I'd never asked to borrow a kid's toy, but when I saw that, I wanted it so badly. And he's like, sure. And then like a week later, he's like, oh, can I have it back? And I'm like, can I borrow it for longer? And he goes, you can just keep it. And for years, I felt guilty about that, but now it was destiny since I'm working on He-Man, so I don't feel as bad. But no, by the time like, really the 90s boom is what I experienced more. It was the tail end of the 80s, and then really that expansion into the 90s. So it was like what was popular and mass produced really was reaching the shores of Hawaii by then. Like Toy Biz with the X-Men and Marvel action figures was huge. Star Wars, the Power of the Force 90s line with like the muscly guys, like that was huge, and I really had access to that. And so a lot of Kenner. Transformers, I like never saw Transformers. Ninja Turtles, I had access to. So like He-Man was like a really special like rarity to get, honestly. And even to this day, I don't really see a lot of He-Man. I see Origins toys now in Hawaii, but like vintage He-Man, I think is very, at least on Maui where I grew up, which is a remote island, like, you know, pretty rare still. You know, but Origins did make retail out there, which I was really excited about.
Wow! I mean, that's amazing. Let me ask you, and just another piece of this. Didn't you have like Toys R Us in Hawaii back then? Or?
So not on my island. Maybe they had one on Oahu or Honolulu, but which is like Honolulu is the capital city of Hawaii. But I don't remember having a Toys R Us on Maui. We had a KB Toys. We did have a KB's Toys. But remember, I was born in the mid to late 80s, right? Like you know? So when I was born and by the time I came of age to get toys, like the big franchises were like Jurassic Park, right? Like I had experienced He-Man and I loved He-Man, but it was on its way out by the time I was like, was when I was of age. So like to me, He-Man was like the remnants of this amazing empire that other kids got to experience, right? So, and He-Man had changed. Like I have no memory of New Adventures of He-Man. I don't know if it made it to Hawaii at all, actually. I have no memory of that show. And I was a kid, you know, I remember the 90s very vividly. But there are other booms that happened in Hawaii, toy collecting as well, like Milk Caps or Pogs. That game was invented on Maui, actually, where I grew up, and that became a huge global phenomenon.
What's the name of that?
Pogs or Milk Caps. You know what Milk Caps are?
Never heard of that.
I don't know,
you guys?
Maybe if you Google it, maybe it's called something else. Look up Pogs toys. Pogs.
Pog toys?
Yeah, Pog toys. If you look up Pog toys online, the milk covers, you know that game where you would have like milk caps? Maybe
yeah. Okay. Los tazos. We
so
call
that
them,
was that was a huge phenomena in the toy world and all across America at the time, but it was in Hawaii for many years because it started on Maui where I grew up. So even finding Dungeons and Dragons books like was really hard for me as a kid until you got to like third edition. Like third edition was really easy to find, but like we had one comic book store on the island when I was growing up. We had like, you know, even to this day, that ecosystem is hard to survive because it's a remote place and they only have so many fans, and it's also a very expensive place to get by, and there are only so many different jobs that people can have on those islands, right? On the island. So anyway, I think I kind of went down the weeds here, but you get what I'm saying.
Hey, we're just squeezing you, so yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Ok, bueno, voy a contestar la pregunta. Sergiño, cuando llegó a He-Man, ya no estaba tan activo en la televisión. Él llegó más para el final, dice, por la edad cuando él nació cerca del final de los 80. No me dio el número pero me dijo entre mitad y final de los 80. Dice, yo tenía un viewfinder de He-Man, tenía algunos juguetes que en realidad los tenía cuando nenes no los querían más, porque como dijo él, era difícil conseguir esos juguetes. Dice que un amigo de él, cuando era chiquito, tenía un mosquitor, y se lo mostró, y le mostró cómo bombeaba la sangre, y me impresionó, y le dije, che, ¿me lo podés prestar unos días? Y se lo prestó, y dice, como a la semana, se le acercó el amigo, che, ¿me lo devolvés? Y él le dijo, bueno, no me lo prestás unos días más. Y el amigo le dio un poquito de lástima, y le dijo, bueno, te lo regalo. Y dice, fue su primer muñeco de He-Man Mosquitor, y ese era medio como el destino. Él lo que llegó a experimentar más es el boom de los 90s, como bueno, los juguetes de Toy Biz, X-Men, los juguetes de Marvel que estaban llegando a Hawái, los de Star Wars, The Power of the Force, Muscle Guys, después de Transformers. Dice, por ejemplo, jamás vi Transformers en la isla, algunas de las Tortugas Ninja, pero He-Man era rarísimo llegar a conseguir. Dice, hoy en día Origins se consiguen en Hawái, pero todo lo que es vintage es muy raro conseguir, en especial en la isla de Maui, donde es él, ¿no? Dice, porque, bueno, yo cuando contestó eso, alargué un poquito la pregunta, preguntándole, pero no hay Toys R Us en Maui, y me dice, no, en Maui no, por ahí en Honolulu o Oahu, que son las otras islas, ahí por ahí sí, pero bueno, nosotros teníamos un KB Toys, creo que vimos unas cuantas sesiones de fotos de KB Toys. Dice, yo nací, bueno, entre mitad y final de los 80, así cuando nací, los juguetes en la época de que yo jugaba eran las franquicias de Jurassic Park. Todo lo anterior, por ejemplo, de He-Man, ya estaba de salida y él lo veía como un imperio impresionante con el que los niños habían jugado antes. Pero bueno, por ejemplo, dice, las nuevas aventuras de He-Man, no recuerdo haberlo visto jamás en la televisión en Hawái. Y dice, y mira que yo sí recuerdo muchísimo de los 90s. Lo que me comentó que, bueno, justamente lo que hablábamos recién, cómo se llamaban esos pop toys, que son acá en Argentina los tazos, y creo que
toda Latinoamérica. Los tacitos, sí.
Dice que nació en Hawái esto, mirá vos, así que tenemos la historia del origen de los tazos, y dice que era una locura, y de ahí se hizo una cosa mundial. Encontrar libros de Dungeons and Dragons, para darnos una idea, eran dificilísimos. Las primeras ediciones imposible, a partir de la tercera edición se conseguían, pero anterior nada. Que en la isla de él tenía solamente una comiquería en ese momento. Y dice, tienen que entender que es un lugar remoto, es caro llevar cosas, hay cierta cantidad de tipos de trabajo que la gente puede hacer en un lugar tan remoto en una isla. Así que dice, bueno, me fui por las ramas. Le digo, no, queremos sacar todo el jugo.
Claro, conocerlo bien y compartir experiencias de otros lugares del mundo, digamos. Como estábamos hablando, está bueno saber la infancia que tuvieron, obviamente muy distinta a la nuestra, así que todo suma, es muy rico lo que está contando.
Totalmente. Che, yo vi un par de preguntas ahí muy copadas, pero bueno, cuando lleguemos a lo que es los minicomics, ahí le preguntamos esas.
Dale.
Oh, se fue. Pensé que se había desmuteado y pensé que iba a tener una pregunta. Yo le quería hacer, si no les molesta, algo que había dicho en la primera pregunta con lo que se respecta al licensing and branding. O sea, sí. Branding es trabajar con marcas en particular y licencias. Por eso quería entender esa parte muy bien, qué es lo del trabajo. Me parece que es unir las historias, no sé, por eso no quiero hablar pavadas, así que le voy a preguntar un poquito de eso a Josh. Dale. Josh, yeah, what I wanted to know before we move on is just you mentioned about licensing and branding that you started working with that. So I wanted to ask you if you can tell us a little bit more about that type of job. What is it exactly? You need to tie together the stories, or for them not to get lost, or give a continuity or something like that?
Sure. So this is very separate from like the creative aspect of things. My first job out of college was with that like licensing and brand assurance department at Marvel. So the way these sorts of things work is, let's just say Marvel makes a big movie like Iron Man. Iron Man was about the time I was onboarded at Marvel, right? So they're going to make this big tentpole blockbuster movie, and they're going to want to do all sorts of, memorabilia and T-shirts and action figures. Well, Marvel doesn't actually produce all those things on its own. It produces content, and that content will hopefully attract what are called licensees, right? Licensees are companies where they make certain products, and they think, oh, if I have certain branding on my product, maybe I can sell more, right? And it can be even more profitable. So if I make T-shirts, I go, oh, if I stamp Iron Man on it, I can hopefully sell more. So those are called licensing deals, where all these sorts of different companies that produce all sorts of business lines will call a content producer like Marvel or Disney, right? And make deals where they produce products and they get the license, which is basically a little like a license or permission within a window of time to produce those sorts of products. And they have an entire process where they can't just release any product. They have to make sure that the product is meeting its certain standards, that the characters are being used properly, that it's meeting a certain standard, and that the brand Marvel, right, wants to is willing to okay it for the market, basically, that it's meeting a certain threshold and standard and sales and all sorts of like that. So my first job was, I started at the very bottom. You know, I was opening boxes and looking at the samples and routing them through teams that would basically approve it legally and approve it for its designs and stuff like that. And a lot of companies that own these big franchises do it. I mean, from anything from Jurassic Park to, you know, Star Trek, you name it, you know, including the stuff we're working on. So yeah, so licensing is a very popular way of branding products where the rights holder doesn't have to produce everything themselves, right? Because that'd be too much to produce. And it also can be lucrative, right? So if you look at the history of even He-Man, right? And I'm not saying this is a Mattel employee or freelancer, I'm really a freelancer, right? If you just look at it objectively, when He-Man came out in the 80s, they licensed it to many different territories, right? And that's why we even see different forms of content, right? You can license anything. You can license products, as we saw this explosion of products in the 1980s, right? In all these different territories, but you can also license the right to create content, right? And we saw that, right, where there are different comic books coming out of Italy, and there are different comics coming out of the UK, and I think even in Latin America there are comics, their own comic lines, right? But remember, there are different tiers and business lines that can be licensed, right? So you can do licensing for publishing, you can do licensing for T-shirts, toys, you name it, right? Bubble bath, all sorts of stuff. So my job at Marvel was, I worked in that department that saw all this explosion of products because the studio had just started releasing movies. So it was an exciting time, but it was also kind of a tough job, honestly, because the volume was so high. It was my first job, which means when you're a kid, you don't get paid as much as like older people and families and stuff. And you're new, you're green, so you're learning. But it was my first, real break in the corporate world and the comic book world, technically. So, yeah.
That is awesome, and I'm sure you've seen some crazy stuff that never got to fruition, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. At Marvel, I did, for sure.
Oh, wow. Me parece que Josh acá tuvo el trabajo cuando empezó en su carrera, el trabajo ideal que a nosotros nos encantaría tener. Dice, bueno, justamente lo de licensing y branding con el que él trabajaba está totalmente separado de lo que fue su vida creativa, ¿no? En Marvel fue su primer trabajo y lo que pasó es que justo Marvel hizo una película gigante como Iron Man cuando entré a trabajar. Lo que hacen Marvel es vender las licencias, como ya sabemos, ¿no? de todo tipo de productos, no solamente de muñecos, sino de remeras, de vasos, de cómics, de absolutamente todo. Bueno, cómics justamente no es Marvel, pero lo que es remeras, juguetes, vasos, platos, loncheras, todas las cosas que venden, licencias. Y para que la empresa apruebe la licencia tiene que pasar por una etapa de legal y una etapa de prueba. Y lo que hacía Josh justamente con ellos era abrir cajas y cajas y cajas de gente ofreciendo licencias, tratar de vender sus productos y ver, obviamente lo que querían fabricar. Yo quería fabricar un buzo acá con la cara de Robert Downey Jr., él lo veía al buzo y daba su opinión de lo que tenían que hacer, ¿no? Para ver si Marvel le daba el ok para sacarlo del mercado, ver el estudio de lo que serían las ventas y todo relacionado a eso. Así que dice, bueno, miraba cajas y miraba pruebas y unos famosos test shots, a ver si lo aprobaban legalmente y con el diseño. Dice, todas las compañías tienen, las compañías grandes tienen este tipo de licencias, Jurassic Park, Star Trek. Dice, entonces lo que es licencias es muy popular, porque los que tienen los derechos no producen absolutamente todo, pues sería imposible tener tantas compañías, así que lo que hacen dan licencias para hacer más lucrativos y no tener que estar invirtiendo en fábricas ellos. Por ejemplo, Mattel, cuando He-Man salió en los 80, salieron varias licencias diferentes de los productos, de todo lo que es contenido. Por ejemplo, cómics Italia, cómics en Latinoamérica. Bueno, yo le hice gesto que acá en Argentina también se hicieron los cómics. Diferentes niveles, diferentes tipos de licencias, jabones, sábanas. Y dice, bueno, él trabajaba en Marvel cuando fue la explosión de los productos por las películas que estaban saliendo de superhéroes. Dice, fue mi primer trabajo, me pagaba muy poco, pero era un laburo muy exigente y excitante. Y bueno, aprendió mucho ahí, ese fue su primer break, su primer grand break.
Claro, estaba prácticamente en la fábrica de los sueños.
Totalmente, imagínate nosotros, sabiendo así, no, este no pasa y se viene acá ahí en la cajita ahí atrás. Es así.
Claro, no, una locura.
Bueno, ¿te parece que le empecemos a preguntar por el trabajo en Mattel con Master of the Universe? Que nos cuente, no sé cuánto tiempo hace que está con los minicomics y demás.
Dale, esa es su pregunta, don Charlie.
Sí, para arrancar.
Vamos. Okay, Charlie is eager to hear you talk about Masters of the Universe. So, Josh, what was you mentioned you had your first deadline at the beginning. So, what were your first steps? What was, for example, which one was the first comic book that you or mini comic that you wrote for Mattel? And what was the experience? Did you have a lot of notebacks? How do you prepare for that? How was that first?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
No, I'm not going to.
Okay.
No, what were, for example, the first steps that you had? You mentioned that you had, they gave you a deadline after you had your meeting. And so how do you prepare for the first comic book? Did they give you like notes? Okay, this one is going to be about Merriman, and I want him to fight Hordak and, well, not Hordak, He-Man with Hordak. I don't know. Just how was that first stage, and once you presented it, did they get back to you saying, hey, no, wait, you need to do some more studying of the characters or something like that? Or once you presented it, was like, hey, man, you are a freaking rock star here of the moto world?
There was a brief learning curve where I had submitted a couple of outlines, and the outlines I'd gotten notes for Wave 11. And then eventually one of the outlines are like, okay, this is a good story, or a story we feel like matches the tone of He-Man. So I had to learn a little bit, or a lot, honestly, but there were I remember there were a few one-page outlines. And then what ended up happening was, once they approved that outline, by then I was in Mexico or Hawaii on my honeymoon. I was in Mexico for the wedding part, where I think they approved the one-page outline that I was cracking. And then when I was in my honeymoon is when I turned in the script in on Maui, I think, actually, where I grew up. But they had characters in mind that they wanted in the adventure. Generally, like if you notice, in each wave that was coming out, like the characters in that wave are featured in that very mini comic, right? So that was like wave dependent. So sometimes it can be really a Rubik's Cube or complex to kind of crack that, because the mini comics are their own animal, right? They're 6 pages long, sometimes 8, sometimes 12 if you're really lucky. And you have basically, if it's a 6-page story, you have to break down a 3-act structure in 2 pages each, right? Each act, you've got 2 pages. Each page can probably take a maximum of like 6 panels, right? With 2 lines of dialogue each, just based on the size, right? And I'm not saying anything that's proprietary or secretive. It's just really the realities of that format, right? So you have to tell a story that's like beginning, middle, end, establish those characters, establish the problem, make it conceptually interesting, have a theme, and then have a payoff that makes the reader care, hopefully, right? With dramatic moments and action. So luckily, I had read many science fiction and fantasy short stories, right? So, so that being said, after reading all those stories, I luckily had gone through like a dojo and writing a lot of science fiction short stories of really telling these kind of maximized, compressed, impactful stories. So that really, between reading a lot of short stories, not only in the prose format and fiction, but also in comic books, and working anthologies like Heavy Metal, that really was a great training ground. And of course, I'm really passionate about the material. I love science fiction and fantasy. And He-Man is the ultimate collision of fantasy and science fiction, right? Star Wars is the ultimate collision of science fiction and fantasy. right? So He-Man, I feel there's no better fantasy sci-fi blend, I think, than He-Man. So it is a very rich lore, and I really enjoyed it. And luckily, when I turned in my script, they liked it. So I felt like, okay, cracked it, you know. And I was off and running from there.
Wow, fantastic, fantastic. Fue un proceso educativo, por ponerlo de una forma. Le dieron algunas ideas básicas y le dieron algunas notas de lo que tenía que hacer. O sea, la historia tenía que encajar con el nivel de historias que venían contando en los minicomics anteriores. Ellos le dieron una descripción de una página muchas veces y él las presentaba y las tenían que aprobar, y basado en esa, obviamente, tenía que entregar después el guión. Dice, el primer guión lo entregué cuando estaba en mi noche de bodas en Maui. Tenía en la descripción le daban los personajes que querían, dependiendo de la wave. O sea, los minicómics son, bueno, igual que en los originales, ¿verdad? Tienen que estar los personajes que van a ir presentándose en esa wave. Y dice, bueno, para mí era muy complejo de encastrar todo. ¿Por qué? Porque tenés 6 páginas, a veces 8, si tenés suerte tenés 12. Tenés que hacer las 3 partes de los arcos con un máximo de 6 paneles, con 2 líneas por página de diálogo. Y dice, bueno, lo que les estoy contando no es un secreto, es la realidad del formato. Contar la historia, presentar el problema, la historia, los personajes, la acción, y que a su vez a la gente le guste, tenga empatía con lo que está viendo y le llame la atención. Por suerte, dice, en mi vida leí muchísimo ciencia ficción, leí muchas historias, escribí mucha ciencia ficción y ayudó a hacer que estas historias impacten. Leo mucho todo lo que es en prosa y en cómics, me ayudó muchísimo, porque dice que es apasionado de todo el material. Y dice, para él, en lo personal, He-Man es la última colisión entre lo que es ciencia ficción y fantasía. Es la mejor mezcla de esos 2 estilos que existen en He-Man. Es muy rico, dice, lo disfruta mucho, y dice, más que nada, me encanta que le gustó su guión, ¿no?
Uy, estaba muteado. Claro, tal cual. ¿Qué te iba a decir?
No, le había preguntado cuál era el primer minicómic. No sé si tenemos problemas con las fotos para mostrarlos. Pues,
no, están las fotos, están las fotitos.
Josh, can I ask you what was the first one that you wrote for Mattel, if you remember? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry.
No worries.
The first one was Wave 11, which was Rise of the Snake Men. So I entered, when the Snake Men re-entered the Origins line, or were introduced in the Origins line, I wrote pretty much all the Snake Men adventures since then. So when it was the adventure where I wanted to start it off really action-packed. So He-Man, in the beginning of that adventure, is dying from being poisoned by the Snake Men, and he Sorceress tells him to find Boltman, right? Boltman, which is from the Sunman universe, who's a part of that wave, which is why I wrote him into the adventure. And Boltman saves him, and what happens is, while he's like recovering from being poisoned, Ratlore and when he's recovering from being poisoned, it was Man-at-Arms and Mechanic show up, and they're like, "Oh, we heard you're sick, He-Man, and like we're here to help." But then like Boltman knows that it's not really them, and they burst out. They basically, I wanted to like play around with Snake, anatomy and stuff. So they burst out because they had fake skins on, basically. So they burst out, and it's really Ratlore and Cobra Khan, and they get into a battle, and then Boltman and He-Man defeat them, and He-Man wants to chase after them, but you only have 6 pages, so I'm like, oh, I better conclude the story, right? So Boltman stops him and says, let them go. There'll always be snakes in the grass. And they go back. And that's kind of how the adventure ends, and I kind of had that clinch ending. So that was my first adventure out the gate, and it was really fun. Some people name that as their favorite, but I don't know if it means that they haven't read the rest of them, but I really had fun writing them. I have fun writing all of them.
Well, if I ever meet you, yes, I would want you to sign that one, and I love this one too.
100%.
Really good one. Bueno, dice el primero que escribió fue para la Wave 11 y fue Rise of the Snake Man. Justo en tu alley, Sergio, que te gustan todo lo que es Snake Man. Fue cuando justo se reintrodujo la línea de todo lo que es las serpientes. Y dice, bueno, quería empezar con toda la furia. He-Man estaba muriendo porque había sido envenenado por el veneno de la serpiente, y Sorcerer le dice que encuentre a Boltman, que justamente tenía que introducirlo por Sandman, uno de los aliados, por eso lo metió en la historia, y lo ayuda a salvarse, y mientras que se recupera, aparecen Man at Arms y Mechanic, y Boltman se da cuenta que hay algo medio raro ahí. Eran en realidad Rattler y Cobra Khan, que tenían la piel falsa encima, y se quería jugar con la anatomía de las serpientes. Así que bueno, básicamente lo fajan, salen corriendo, y dice, quería seguir la historia de que He-Man los quería seguir, pero le puso que Boltman le dijo, no te preocupes, siempre va a haber serpientes en el pasto, y no pudo continuar la historia en ese momento, pero dice, bueno, fue su primera aventura, y dice que cuando conoce fans y gente que le gusta los minicomics, le dicen que suele ser su favorito. Agua. Sí, bueno, que no sé, quieren algunos de ustedes, muchachos, continuar con una pregunta de esto. Había una de Gabriel Luque que me había gustado por ahí, pero bueno.
Sí, ya te la muestro porque la dejé acá para...
Ahí va. ¿Apareció?
No, ahí voy.
Ahí.
Okay. Yeah, this is one of the questions of the guys that was when you were mentioning that you started working in Mattel. Gabriel Luque, by the way, he's one of the artists that makes all of the art in the Origins line. I don't know if you know him. You do? Okay. Oh, you're muted again.
I didn't hear his name. Can you repeat that?
Gabriel Luque. You can see him right.
Oh, cool. Oh, cool. Very cool.
He's one of the artists that does the Origins new cardbacks, I guess.
Oh, cool.
No sé si saben cuáles hizo Gabriel, así le comento qué figuras, a ver si tenemos un match, sería hermoso, ¿no? Gabriel, si querés contarnos alguna de las figuras que así le comentamos justamente a Josh, a ver si podemos, sería genial que los dos laburaran en el mismo producto. So the question that Gabriel has for you actually is if you know who was writing Origins before you jump in, because we do see a little bit of a change in the stories. Of course, you joined with Snake Man, something that we all Moto fans were crazy about. So you join in with an art.
So I can break it down for you. So Robert Rudman, I call him the great Robert Rudman. But Robert Rudman, who does, you may know him also as the copywriter behind WWE, right? So a lot of the copy written on the packaging and around the brand WWE, he wrote. He also wrote, he wrote all the adventures for Motu Origins up to Wave 11. And so far, he's written all the cross-licensed Origins material. So, for example, he wrote the Gary V issue. He wrote the Ninja Turtles, Turtles of Grayskull action figure mini comics, and he also wrote the new Transformers He-Man crossover. So he's been doing all the crossover licensed, like co-branded mini comics. And since Wave 11, I've been doing all the mainline mini comics for Origins and also for Mattel Creations.
Fantastic. Ok. Me dice, bueno, te lo puedo partir, explicártelo. Robert Rodman, el gran Robert Rodman, que trabaja haciendo todo lo que es los derechos para la WWE, la de lucha. Dice que él escribió todas las waves hasta la número 11, que es cuando entró Josh, y a partir de ahí las empezó a escribir Josh. Y dice, bueno, por ejemplo, él ahora se está encargando de todo lo que son licencias cruzadas, Gary V, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, las Tortugas de Grayskull, Transformers, He-Man, y él se encarga de todos los crossovers desde la web, de la Wave 11 en adelante. Como dije, Josh trabaja para Origins y Mattel Creations. Like I was telling you, yeah, Gabriel here, he does the packaging art, and he did Extendar, Rio Blast, Geldor, Voltac, Battle for Eternia 4-pack, and what is coming, Dragstar.
Wow, yeah, love his artwork. Love all of his artwork.
Bueno,
yeah.
Gabriel,
I guess we worked a lot together without me realizing it. Great to meet you.
Dice que trabajaron mucho juntos sin darse cuenta. Un placer conocerte. He's online and he's typing, that is why. There you go.
I might just know him as his Instagram handle also. That's definitely a possibility.
No, sí, puede ser que te conozca por Instagram, dice. Hay una gran posibilidad ahí.
Gus, ya que estamos ahí justo también hablando de Gabriel y demás, me gustaría preguntarle cómo es el trabajo con el dibujante, cómo realizan el cómic, si es él hace el guión y el dibujante luego lo pasa, lo dibuja, o cómo es ese trabajo.
Excelente pregunta, y la tenía en mis preguntas acá, pero mi pregunta no iba por ese lado. Mi pregunta iba a ir por el lado de qué le parecían el trabajo plasmado, su trabajo en palabras, porque usualmente los guionistas cuando filman películas, no sé si viste, se quejan y van al director y dicen, no, pero esto no es así, por eso le voy a agregar a tu pregunta si no te jode. Josh, I had a follow-up question, but Charlie had a question, and we're going to mix the two questions together, okay? When you write a script, how is the symbiosis between you and the artists that do all of the drawings and they do all of the panels? And my part of the symbiosis with my friend here is what happens if you don't like it. Can you go, for example, like usually movie writers or TV show writers, they're on the set and they go to the director, listen, I don't like this part, this is not how I wrote it. What happens if something like that happens in your case?
So I've been lucky in the sense that many of the artists that I've worked with are really talented, and they are really excited to be working on this brand. And we all want to do our best job, of course, right? Because we're fans like you and we really care. Generally, the process is just like in any other comic book, in the sense where what I'm really concerned about most is, obviously you want the art to be really great, but what I want to be important is that things are clear and make sense, and there's a continuity to things, and that the more the reader pays attention, the more they're rewarded, right, for paying attention to in the first place, right? So clarity above all is what I'm going for, and a lot of my notes usually have to do with that, where I'm like, hey, did we mean to do this? And hey, I think that what I was really trying to describe was this. And generally the process, which is really the same almost in any comic creation, whether it's an independent book or a branded book or, you know, with an editorial team, is that there's a back and forth where the notes are sent to the editor or to the designers or to the artists. So, you know, the thing I will say is a lot of these, if you read the Dark Horse mini comics collection that came out with the amazing stuff from the 80s, in those interviews, a lot of the process is kind of the same. And, you know, but instead of mailing in the art, they email the art, right? Or upload the art. And if instead of mailing the script, they do that, right? So a lot of the sort of logic behind it is still there. But like those comics then, today, sometimes they are done at breakneck speed. So they're under a time crunch, you know? So sometimes it's not only that you have so much space and that these stories have to be told in such a contained way, but, you know, they're sometimes under, you know, deadlines. Usually lately, you know, or sometimes you have a good amount of time. It just kind of, I guess, depends on like production needs, right?
All right, thank you so much, Josh. Dice, en mi caso tengo suerte, los artistas con los que trabajo son muy talentosos, les gusta mucho trabajar en esta marca y nosotros todos queremos tratar de hacer el mejor trabajo y trabajar muchísimo. La forma y el formato de trabajo es más o menos el mismo que harías con cualquier cómic. Y dice, me preocupa más que el arte que sea genial y me vuelva loco, que sea claro, que tenga sentido, que cuando una persona lo va leyendo tenga su premio, ¿no? En ir leyéndolo y que le vaya gustando. Dice, el proceso es muy similar a lo que es tanto un cómic independiente como un cómic editorial. Se pasan notas entre editor, diseñador, artista. Y dice, por ejemplo, si vas a la colección de cómics de Dark Horse, el proceso, y él lees todo lo que es el making, el proceso de ellos era muy similar. Antes lo mandaban por correo, ahora lo mandan por email, lo suben a la nube y bueno, se van pasando notas entre ellos. A veces se hace muy rápido, tenés poco espacio para hacerlo, tenés historias contenidas a lo que se refiere al arte. Y sí, otras veces tenemos mucho tiempo para trabajarlo. Todo depende de la producción del cómic, del minicómic.
Bien.
Hermoso.
Para seguir, ¿qué tanta libertad creativa tiene? Ponele, entiendo que Mattel quizás le dice, mirá, tenés que hablar en base de este personaje en este cómic, ¿no? Ahora, la aventura que vive ese personaje dentro de ese cómic, ¿también tiene alguna directiva o él puede desarrollar la historia y el destino que tenga el personaje en esa historia?
Excelente pregunta. Josh, okay, so what is the type of creative freedom that you usually have? I know that Mattel gives you the characters depending on the wave, but do they also give you like directives or outlines on the story, or does that come out completely out of you? Like the story and introduction, story and the ending. Does it?
Yeah. It's a tremendous amount of freedom within reason, of course, right? Like I can't just like kill off a bunch of characters and be like, they're never coming back and they're really dead, right? Or like, or but as long as I'm being true to He-Man, which is, what I'm always trying to go for, and to Masters of the Universe, it's a tremendous amount of freedom. For example, with Rise of the Snake Men, they let me pretty much do all the stories I wanted to do, but again, people ask me, what is your goal with Master of the Universe? And my goal is really simple. My two goals are to tell a really great story and not screw up the gig. Those are my goals, right? I want to tell stories that fans like, because I'm a fan too. I want to do a good job. I care about this stuff, right? As much as you guys do, right? I am you guys, right? So it's a tremendous amount of freedom. So for Rise of the Snake Men, I got to write Wave 11 and then all the other stories that were all really connected. That whole Rise of the Snake Men arc is all connected, for example. And actually all the mini comics to a degree are connected as one story, that if you really pay attention, you can see how they're linked. But they're also designed, because I was influenced by Marvel, where every comic book should be someone's first comic book, meaning if someone finds any singular issue, they understand what's going on with it, and hopefully they care. That's what I want to do. I want to make readers care, because if you make them care, then it works, right? If you emotionally move them, they care, and if they care, the work matters, right? So for He-Man, for that Rise of Snake Men story arc, for example, I had made it so that the Snake Men wanted to not just assassinate He-Man, but they wanted to assassinate Skeletor and Randor. So if you read this preceding adventures, the next adventure was one of the following adventures was with another Sunmen character, and its title is escaping me. Oh, it was called Assassin's Aim. In that issue, the Snake Men try to assassinate Skeletor, right? And then in another issue, we had the Horde of Frogmonger. And the Horde of Frogmonger, the Snake Men were almost successful in wiping out and killing Randor. They wanted to wipe out all the leadership so that the Snake Men could take over. But the funnest part of writing the Snake Men, the game of the Snake Men, in my opinion, is that there's no honor amongst thieves, right? The Snake Men will always try to backstab each other, even if they come to power, right? Because a snake can't trust a snake, right? And to me, that's why ultimately good will always prevail against evil, in my opinion, because evil will never be able to trust itself, right? But good is good, and with honesty and goodness, you have power, right? ultimately, in my opinion, is what is He-Man really about? What is Master Universe about? It's about empowerment. That's why I have the power, right? So anyway, that's my rant on that.
And that was beautiful. Listen, we have a lot of more questions. If not, that would have been the perfect ending. But yeah, we're gonna keep on going. Probably we'll get back to that one. Bueno, lo que dice es que la verdad me dan una libertad gigante para escribir. Dice, obviamente, no puedo matar a un personaje principal y que no vuelva nunca más, ¿no? Pero claro, mientras que sea honesto a lo que es la historia de He-Man y Masters of the Universe, tiene una libertad creativa absoluta. Dice, por ejemplo, en Rise of the Snake Man me dijeron que hiciera todas las historias que quisiera hacer, y dice, bueno, yo tengo mis dos objetivos principales. Uno es contar una buena historia, que a la gente le interese, y la segunda, no cagar el laburo. Dice, me preocupa mucho esto, exactamente igual a ustedes. Con Rise of Snake Man, de la Wave 11 y todas las historias, si ustedes la leen y prestan atención a los detalles, todas las historias están conectadas. Cada cómic, dice la directiva que tiene, es que cada cómic tiene que ser como si fuera el primero que una persona lee, y tiene que uno obviamente relacionarse emocionalmente y que te empiecen a preocupar los personajes que te interesen. Dice, por ejemplo, en Rise of the Snake Man, no solamente querían matar a He-Man, después en los otros dos siguientes cómics, los Snake Man querían matar a Skeletor y querían matar a Randor. Ahí, bueno, obviamente, en ¿cómo se llamaba? Assassin's Aim, uno de los minicomics, y tenés la fotito ahí, los Snake Men quieren matar a Skeletor. En Horde of the Frogmonger querían matar a Randor para hacerse cargo de todos ellos. Y dice, lo que pasa, como son Snake Men, son serpientes, no hay honor entre ladrones. Ellos se quieren matar siempre entre ellos y se traicionan entre ellos mismos. Y dice, por eso, no se confíen en las serpientes. Pero todos los que son los buenos son siempre buenos. Y la honestidad tiene bondad y poder, y por eso siempre ganan sobre lo que son los malos. Sí, todo lo de los serpientes se escribe, fabuloso, toda esa etapa.
No, decirle que yo soy muy fanático de esa línea, de todo lo que son serpientes, y la verdad que estoy teniendo la suerte de poder tenerlos, y estoy siguiendo la línea, y la verdad que me encanta la historia que está creando.
¿Sabes qué le voy a preguntar? Justamente ahora que estamos hablando de los Snake Men, si leyó algunos de los minicomics obviamente, mientras estaba haciendo eso, lo hizo, pero me gustaría saber cómo siente que las historias, si siguen estando como si fueran el mismo universo al mismo tiempo, o siente que algunas historias están como desfasadas en el tiempo. No sé si me explico con la pregunta, espero tratar de explicarme bien, ¿no? Unas historias que leíamos en los 80, por ahí ahora serían muy, muy naive, y por eso tienen que hacer otro tipo de historias. Josh, what I'm wanting to ask you now, by the way, Sergio just mentioned that he's the Snake Men are one of the most favorite of his lines, and he loves the art and everything that you're doing, and he's following the stories, and he loves it. Me, what I wanted to ask you is this: the Snake Men, most of them came out back in the 80s. There were some stories in the mini comics, and I'm sure you did your research. You mentioned that you did a lot of research to get to where you are right now. So I wanted to see if the stories that you read in the past, if you feel like they're not updated, but in a way, or they're more naive than for the common reader or kids for this age, and comparing it to when we were kids from the 70s growing up in the 80s and reading that. do you feel like that those are like old stories, or do you think that, for example, if we grab one of your comic books, we can slide it in one of the vintage mini comics, and it will belong to the same era, to put it in a way? Tricky question, I know.
Yeah, no. Honestly, I wish I could say definitively that they could, but the thing was that so much of the style is different between the mini comics, just based on the artists and even the printing methods of the time. Like if you take an 80s comic book, right, it's just so much, it pops with so much color, right? Because of the paper and the printing that they used, and also the sensibilities of the artists at that time. He-Man was also a different property because it was embryonic at that time, right? It was being born. So everything was just so, the sensibilities were different. If you take those Dark Horse mini comics, right, and you read the interviews, the attitudes of the creatives are hilarious because, you know, they'll be like, you know, Larry Houston will be like, by day I was directing G.I. Joe and by night I was drawing He-Man, right? And if you speak to Donald Glut, who, by the way, lives like down the block from me, right? It lives so close to him. I see him like once a month at a convention in my neighborhood, right? Donald Glut, who wrote the core 4 original Motu mini comics. When I speak to Donald Glut, he's like, He-Man, I thought it was a silly idea. Like it sounds like a guy is going to steal your girlfriend and throw sand in your face at the beach, right? Meanwhile, by the time you get to us, my generation who grew up, we're like, He-Man is the greatest. Like, you know what I mean? So the attitudes are completely different. What I will say is I did do my homework and I tried to match the lore as best as I could, you know, and to continue the legacy of what these guys are creating, you know. But the art styles are different per the artist. The printing style is different, but I think the spirit is still there, right? And that the stories, a lot of what I reference in my stories are building on their giants, on those giants. So I would say that those stories that I write, I want to reward the readers for knowing the past of He-Man and the present of He-Man, but I also want a reward of giving them something that's new, but a logical progression that makes sense so that you contribute something. Because if you don't contribute anything, it doesn't grow. But if you try to steal it and make it your own, it's not true. You understand what I'm saying? I think we saw that with some of the Star Wars movies. So like, you know, so my goal isn't to like come in and be like, He-Man's mine now, guys. You know, no. I just want to tell a great story, a great He-Man story where fans go, that was fun. That was great. Oh, yeah. And he got that little, he had detail in there from that. Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, and there's a new thing, you know? That's what I'm kind of going for, if that makes sense.
Fantastic. That is fantastic to hear.
Hasta interpretación tuvimos.
Sí. Nos faltó la risa de Skeletor, ¿no?
Claro.
Dice, me gustaría honestamente poder decirte que sí, que encajan directamente en los minicomics de ahora, en lo que son los minicomics vintage, pero bueno, cambiaron tantas cosas, los artistas, los métodos de impresión. Dice, en los 80 teníamos muchísimos colores por los tipos de imprentas que utilizaban. También, a su vez, He-Man estaba empezando, todo era nuevo, había nuevas sensibilidades. Si tomás, por ejemplo, como dijo antes, todo lo que es el making de los cómics de Dark Horse, las actitudes de los creadores era completamente diferente. Dice, Larry Hughes hacía de día G.I. Joe y de noche escribía He-Man. Donald Watt, que dice, bueno, justamente que vive cerca de él, es el que escribió los 4 minicómics originales, los bases que salieron las primeras figuras, dice, directamente pensaba que era una idea tonta. Dice, claro. ¿Quién es el He-Man? Es un flaco que te roba la novia y se va a la playa. Dice, las actitudes son diferentes. Ya fue cuando hizo toda la escena de yo me vuelvo loco, He-Man, ¡ah, mío! ¿Entendés? Dice, quiere emparejarse con los artistas de la época, en lo que es su trabajo, pero con el espíritu también de la época, a través del espíritu de la época. Dice, los dibujos son diferentes, mis historias son basadas en las historias de estos gigantes, pero dice, lo que quiero primero es que haya una progresión lógica. Si no contribuís, dice, no creces. Si robás ideas, no estás siendo honesto, que dice, es lo que vemos mucho con las películas de Star Wars. Claro. Y yo no pienso, He-Man es mío, ahora hago lo que quiero. Dice, quiero contar una buena historia y que los fans lean, uy, mira el detalle que puso acá, uy, esto estaba en tal cosa, uy, esto es nuevo, me encantó. Así que me gustan muchas las ideas que tiene este muchacho. La verdad, para ser honesto, sí. Me encanta.
¿Te parece que hagamos un par de preguntas de la gente que también puede que enganchen con lo que acabas de decir? Mirá.
Me encanta.
El amigo Neo Tigre que dice, yo le preguntaría qué héroe y qué villano le gustaría de desarrollar en historias más extensas de forma individual y por qué razón.
All right, one of the questions from Neo Tiger or Tigre. He would like to know which hero and villain would you like to develop in a more extensive story or storyline, in an individual way, and what will be the reason for that?
That's a really good question. I've gotten to work on some really great classic villains for He-Man, with the Snake Men, with Skeletor, and with Hordak. You know, it's an interesting question also because having written this latest arc with the Horde invasion, I got to play with characters from the She-Ra universe, and I got to play with Hordak. And my conclusion about Hordak is that Hordak, who's more evil, Skeletor or Hordak? Hordak is way more evil. Way more evil, and not even close. In my opinion, I'm not speaking for the company, I'm speaking as a creative. I think that Hordak is so much more evil than Skeletor. Skeletor is more cunning than Hordak. Much more cunning and diabolical in his own way. And Skeletor is more of a perfect bad guy against He-Man. The perfect characters are He-Man and Skeletor. Superman is a perfect character. I think Superman and He-Man are amongst the most perfect superhero characters. But Lex Luthor is not as good as a perfect bad guy as Skeletor is for He-Man as he is for Superman, in my opinion, right? So what I will say also is that the bad guy I would pick, I mean, I would say it's probably either Ninjor or I would say Ninjor or Mosquitor. Mosquitor because of nostalgia, and that was my first, like, you know, taste of the, you know, those action figures as a kid, and I have a lot of nostalgia for it. But I'm really interested in Ninjor because I feel like there's so much of a ninja universe you could build out for He-Man. That's the cool thing about He-Man. You could have spaceships. You could have, you know, ninjas. You can have, you know, you can have anything really. Snake Men. So I would say, that, like, those would be the two bad guys, just off the top of my head. But I wouldn't say they're necessarily as important bad guys as Hordak and Skeletor. You know, those guys are like the pillar characters. It'd be fun, I guess, to come up with someone as important, but I wouldn't want to do that unless it came natural. You know, that it was like a logical progression somehow that made sense and was true.
Fantastic. Ahí nos dice que es una muy buena pregunta, a la pregunta de Neo Tigre. Laburar con los villanos clásicos de He-Man me encanta. He-Man, Skeletor, Hordak, los Snake Men. No solo en lo último que está trabajando es todo lo que es la Horda y su invasión. Y dijo un comentario, bueno, ¿quién es más malo? ¿Hordak o Skeletor? Dice, bueno, obviamente, Hordak es muchísimo más diabólico, pero Skeletor es el perfecto enemigo para He-Man. Dice, por ejemplo, He-Man y Superman para mí son los mejores superhéroes que existen. Y dice, Skeletor es perfecto para He-Man, pero Lex Luthor no me parece un perfecto villano para Superman. Mi opinión, obviamente, es lo que dice. Y también dice, como malos que elegiría yo para extenderlo serían Ninjor y Mosquitor. Mosquitor, obviamente, por la nostalgia de su vida creciendo con He-Man, y Ninjor porque dice, puedo tener naves espaciales y puedo tener ninjas, puedes tener lo que quieras, hombres, serpientes, así que dirigiría a esos dos. Pero dice que jamás serían tan importantes como Hordak y Skeletor, aunque sería divertido lograr hacer un villano tan importante, pero tendría que salir de forma natural y de forma progresiva que se vaya dando, no que lo escribe y de repente es el villano más importante de toda la saga.
Yo quería sumar una preguntita, Gus, ahora, ya que estamos por el lado de los villanos, los héroes.
Un poquito más, Josh. Josh, you have a few more minutes, right? We're good?
Yeah, I would say I could do maybe like 25 more minutes, if that's okay, or half. I would stay longer, but I have a Latina wife, and she's demanding, as you guys all know.
Absolutely. Dice, tengo 25 minutos más o menos, pues tienen la esposa latina, como sabemos nosotros, y lo está demandando, como ya sabemos nosotros, ¿no?
Bueno, entonces, no, le quería preguntar...
One more thing, and my wife does say hola to everyone. She types.
Hola.
Hola.
Muchas gracias por prestarnos al
Hola.
marido.
Muchas gracias. No, quería saber qué fue digamos, con el tema de los villanos, él dice que Hordak es un villano así bien power, poderoso. Escribir esta historia, la hermana del héroe con el villano más power, más diabólico. ¿Qué nos puede contar de esa creación?
Okay, so Sergio would like to know what was that? How was it write that story? The sister of the mega hero versus the worst villain that can exist.
Oh, you mean that issue that you held up, Phantoms of Despera? What was it like?
Yes.
That was a fun one to write. I thought the artist did a really great job on it. I believe his name's Riley Brown, as I recall. No, it was a fun adventure to write. Some adventures are really challenging to write because, remember, you want to be true to He-Man lore, but sometimes the character's so new or there's not that much lore there. So even when you do all your homework, it's like you get to the edge of the universe and the universe goes, now you have to continue building it. So I'm like, okay, well, what piece makes sense to keep extending the universe, right? So for that one, I did all the homework that I could, and it was really a fun adventure to write, and I thought the artist did a great job. I had something else I wanted to say, but I completely forget, so I guess we'll just end it there. Yeah, for that question.
Love it. The story of my life. Dice que le pareció muy divertido escribir esta historia. El artista se llama, creo que es Riley Brown, el que hizo el arte. Dice, algunas aventuras son difíciles, queréis seguir el lore de los personajes, pero bueno, justamente este personaje no tiene mucho, así que llegas hasta el borde del universo de lo escrito y dice, tenés que extenderlo. Así que dice, bueno, hice todo el trabajo que pude y creo que lo hice bastante bien y me divertí mucho escribiéndolo. Dice, tenía algo más que decir y me lo olvidé.
One thing I remember now, this is actually a really cool detail to remember. So, like, what is true He-Man, right? That's a really interesting question. So when He-Man was born, right, in the 80s, there was an explosion of all this content all around the world of different creative teams creating He-Man stuff. You had the Filmation cartoon series, you had the mini comics, you had the Italian comics, you had the comics coming out of your region, right? You had the Germans making comics, right? And everyone's doing great stuff, right? But then you had the 2000X series, right? You had New Adventures of He-Man, you had She-Ra, right? Now you have the Netflix series. So, like, then you had the Dark Horse comic books, and you had all sorts of stuff. So when you read all this stuff, when I was like, okay, I have to write these adventures, I'm like, what is the truest version? And what you have to do is I try to read all of it or absorb as much as I can and make it true for the mini comics, because that's the format I'm writing in. So that, like, to me, that's a part of a distillation of my process, right? And I want to make it true to the mini comics. The other thing is, before, when you're asking, like, do you compare it to the original mini comics? I love some of the, I mean, it's an honor to write on the mini comics or to be a creative, because some of the greatest comic artists and writers worked on those originals. So I hope I can live up to them, honestly, and do them justice and honor, right? But I would say that they just also had certain privileges that I didn't have, right? Just like I had privileges they didn't have back then. Namely, they had way more pages, right, to tell some of these stories. So those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you so much, Josh. Dice, bueno, un detalle cool, ahí me acordé de qué es el verdadero He-Man. Cuando He-Man nació en los 80 fue una explosión de contenido, diferente material, Filmation, Cartoon, minicomics, salieron los cómics italianos, los latinos, los alemanes, y después vinieron, bueno, 2000X, vino las nuevas aventuras, Netflix, los cómics de Dark Horse. Y dice, bueno, cuando yo empecé a estudiar para hacer los minicomics, traté de ser honesto al personaje, pero ¿cuál es la honestidad del personaje? Así que leí, traté de absorber todo y ser honesto al personaje en el formato minicómic. Esa parte es la destilación de mi proceso, ser honesto al minicómic. Cuando me preguntaste antes si comparaba los minicómics de ahora con los originales, dice, en esa época había tanto artistas increíbles y escritores increíbles, y ojalá yo pueda hacer justicia y honrar al trabajo de ellos. Pero bueno, ellos tienen algunos privilegios que yo no tengo, que es, por ejemplo, la cantidad de páginas que tenían los cómics anteriores.
Claro.
Ahora hay
Bien.
veces que los tiene cortitos.
¿Qué te iba a decir? ¿Querés que vayamos con una preguntita más de la gente?
Dale, vamos.
Y después vemos cómo seguimos. Acá va.
Dale, sí.
Preguntita del amigo Gonzalo. Dice, en los minicomics de Cartoon Collection mezclan los personajes de Filmation con los personajes y vehículos de la línea de juguetes vintage, que nunca salieron en la animación. Pregunta si eso es decisión suya.
Ok, buenísimo. So the question from Gonzalo is, in the minicomics Cartoon Collection, you mixed characters from Filmation with characters and vehicles from the Vintage Collection line that never came out in the actual animation of the cartoon. Was that your decision to make, or was that one of the guidelines that they gave you?
That was my decision. I just thought it would be cool to have them together, quite frankly. Sometimes I in my homework for these things, I do look up things that never got released that for some of the action figures, even certain characters, like conceptual characters that we never got to see. I think it was in, I forgot which adventure. It was in the recent Horde Invasion arc. There was like a brain character that we only saw a concept of that they were thinking about making. And he had like a blood pump action brain. And I thought, oh, that's so cool. I'd love to put that in there. And what was it? Who recognized it? Pixel Dan recognized it right off the bat what I was doing. So no, I love to showcase everything that I can that makes sense for the story, because I don't really see it as just Cartoon Collection or Filmation. I just see it as the mini comics universe, and it happens to be the Cartoon Collection wave. So that's not really, we do it in the cartoon style, of course, but to me, again, Mattel has been very kind and gracious in terms of being flexible with things. And I also want to say that they really care. As like all the people, that's the difference between the 80s people and now too. Because the 80s people, they were inventing it. So they didn't grow up with it. They grew up with Conan and Frank Frazetta and Ray Harryhausen. We grew up with He-Man and Star Wars and Transformers. So the attitudes are just different. So everyone I speak to at Mattel now absolutely loves He-Man. And you feel that. When you take an Origins figure or Masterverse figure, you feel it on every layer of that thing. Like take an Origins figure, right? The artwork's incredible, right? The figure's incredible. Hopefully you guys like the mini comics, right? But what I will say this is that there are multiple stories going on, though, at the same time. There's the cardback art, right? Which I'm so glad we have someone here who's worked on them, and really it's an honor, and I love their work, right? But like, so you have the cardback art, right? Which is incredible, and it tells its own story. Gabriel, thank you. But you also have the mini comics. You have the copy, right? So Robert Rudman, who I had mentioned earlier, for a long time, he's been the voice of He-Man as a copywriter, right? And I believe we have, there may be someone new coming on board who'll be doing that copy, right, as the voice of the brand itself on the packaging and such, right? But that's a story. You have the mini comics or the story, and you may have what might be the most important story is the stories that fans make up when they play with these toys, right? The stories you guys bring to the table. I often wonder, as someone who loves He-Man and good stories, right? And I collect stories. I collect comic books. I collect science fiction novels. I collect anthologies, right? I love good imaginative stories, right? I love it. And I've gone far and wide hunting them down. And what I will say is, I often lament, were there any great, and I'm sure there were, great stories that only that kid saw in their head that afternoon when they played with the toys, or a dad played with his son or his daughter, or the mom with the son or her daughter. I wonder about that.
I'm sorry, it just took me a second. Just wanted to write everything down because that is a fantastic, fantastic point. And yes, you grow X amount of mini comics and stories, but the amount of stories that I play with growing up and playing with toys till about I was like 13. Yeah, wow. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Dice que la decisión de mezclarla, como decía Gonzalo, de mezclar las diferentes colecciones fue directamente decisión de Josh. Me parecía cool mezclarlas. cosas, hasta mezclar cosas que nunca se lanzaron y personajes que están en concept. Creo que fue ahora en la parte de Horde Invasion, trajo un personaje de un cerebro que bombea sangre y dice, me encantaría ponerlo. Pixel Dan lo reconoció enseguida al personaje de uno de los concept art y bueno, me gustaría mostrarlo al mundo. No lo veo como cartoon o filmation, sino yo lo veo como minicomic. No importa que sea el mismo wave, sino que entre en la historia del minicomic. Dice, Mattel es muy bueno y flexible, con lo que se refiere a ellos. Dice que la gente de Mattel ahora se preocupa muchísimo por la historia, a diferencia de la gente de los 80s, que por ejemplo crecieron viendo a Ray Harryhauser, Conan, y tenían actitudes diferentes. Los de Mattel de ahora crecieron viendo a He-Man. Así que cuando hacen Origins o Masterverse, tratan de que el arte sea increíble, que la figura sea increíble, y espero que mis historias para los minicómics también sean increíbles. Y bueno, volvió justamente a mencionar nuevamente a Gabriel, que es un honor y un placer poder conocerlo y saber que está acá. El arte de los Carbacks también ya cuenta una historia en sí mismo. Dice, también tenemos, por ejemplo, a Robert Rodman. Él fue la voz de He-Man, lo que nos contó antes, ¿no? Haciendo toda la parte de copyright, y cree que ahora va a empezar alguien nuevo en ese puesto. Y dice, pero lo que yo creo siempre que la historia más importante es la historia de los fans, de los nenes que juegan, de los nenes que juegan sus papás, las nenas que juegan sus mamás, y escriben historias cada vez que juegan. Y dice, lo que yo lamento es no poder leer y escuchar todas esas historias que quedan ahí en el camino, ¿no? Jugando. Dice que él se movió bastante para conseguir ciencia ficción como coleccionista de historias y conseguir nuevas narrativas. Dice, lo único que me importa es, lástima, no puedo tener acceso a todas esas historias de los nenes jugando. Es buenísimo, es buenísimo. Le dije yo eso, justamente, yo jugando hasta los 13 años con He-Man, G.I. Joe, Mego y la cantidad de historias y aventuras que tuve, por ahí alguna sería ganadora de premios, ¿no? Pero bueno.
Tal cual, tal cual. En relación a esto que viene hablando, ¿no? Él habla mucho de crear historias. Te das cuenta que es uno de los nuestros. ¿Creó algún personaje, o sea, en el universo Motu? Que no nos lo diga, obviamente, que se reserve, pero ¿tiene algún personaje que quizás él diga, me gustaría que en algún momento o lo presente y diga, bueno, sí, vamos a hacerlo?
¿Te imaginas conseguir esa exclusiva, Charlie? So Charlie has a question. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it. Maybe you can vaguely answer it. That will be cool too. You as a storyteller, did you create or come up with a character for Masters of the Universe that you have or had that maybe you're someday looking to present it as a new character, or maybe you did? Again, I know that there are a lot of copyright things that you cannot talk about, but whatever answer you can give us, that will be.
That's a great question. I would say, like, in the writing, when it makes sense for new characters to show up, that's when they show up, right? Because I don't go home and I go, what character am I gonna like force into He-Man this time, right? Like, I want it to be logical. So, for example, in the adventure Star Marshal with Rio Blast, right? And I had a really great time reading as much as I could. And in the UK comics, I like found out that he came from this planet called Starband, right? And Starband, the front of the planet was destroyed, but we don't know what happened to the back of the planet, right? So I thought, and it had mentioned randomly use a Star Marshal out on Starband, which was kind of like a frontier Western future planet, kind of like Brave Star, right? Which I think Mattel also worked on, if I recall, at least the toy line in the 80s, right? So I thought, that's so cool. And I went, what if he goes back to his planet and on the other side there's like other Star Marshals? That would be really cool, right? And it'd be cool to like, and that's when I introduced a new team, right? So I didn't have that in my head where I was waiting for the day. I let the story bring that out naturally because I feel like that's better, right? And the reader appreciates more. And I even put a little note, an editorial note of like, about this lore, I said, as unearthed in like this issue of the UK. Fans loved it when I did that because they're like, oh, wow, now I can actually, if I wanted to, I could go find that comic somewhere from the 80s. somewhere that's from a different region, and this still bridges into that. That's cool, right? So, and then they made all these customs of it, you know, and I thought it was just the greatest thing. And there have also been times where, you know, Frogmonger didn't have any lore. So we had a design, right? But we didn't really have any lore behind Frogmonger, and I had the opportunity to really build that out. So again, like my job in my mind, at least, isn't to just like rubber stamp He-Man as my own. This is something that's so much larger than any creative on it. You know, this is like a team effort, right? We have the power, right? So it's what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be true and tell a great story. And if that adds to the great story, bringing in a new character naturally, that's great. But I guess that's not my main goal. I don't think of it that way. I think of it story first, and I try to take care of the characters that I have already. And I feel like that builds out naturally on its own from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You answered it, and you didn't answer it, but I loved it.
I answered it.
You did. Yes, you did. You're right. Yes, you did. Ya. Diría que en lo que es la escritura, cuando tiene sentido que aparezcan de forma natural los personajes, deja que aparezcan, pero dice, no voy a ponerme a escribir algo para escribir un personaje o forzar un personaje dentro de la historia. Dice, por ejemplo, la historia del Star Marshal con Rio Blast. Leí todo lo que pude en los cómics de Inglaterra. Dicen que viene del planeta Starban. El planeta, no sé si lo recuerdan, explotó y tiene la mitad reventada y la otra mitad no. Y no te dicen qué pasó con la otra mitad del planeta. Dice el personaje, bueno, obviamente es un western de fronteras tipo Brave Star. Dice, me parece muy cool. Y dije, ¿qué pasa si vuelve a su planeta y en la parte que no explotó hay otro Star Marshal? Y bueno, él dice, no lo tenía en mi cabeza para crear algo así, pero se fue dando de forma natural. Y dice, y al final puse una nota editorial diciendo, si quieren leer más de esto, cómo empezó, pueden ir al minicomic en tal lugar, y si los fans se volvieron locos diciendo, hay un puente entre ese cómic y ahora está siguiendo la historia. Dice, por ejemplo, Frogmonger no tenía lore, así que pudo construir todo, trabajar todo desde su mente. Y dice, mi idea no es estampar He-Man como mío, yo tengo, es un trabajo en equipo. Dice, quiero ser honesto a una buena historia, y si un nuevo personaje tiene que entrar, va a entrar de forma natural, no porque él lo está forzando. Él dice que piensa siempre primero en la historia y jugar con los personajes que tiene. Ahí está, ahora The Frogmonger. Muy buena figura esta también,
Sí.
Bueno, dígame un par de preguntitas más, hacemos así, lo podemos dejar ir a Josh con su mujer, porque si no lo va a fajar. A couple more questions, Josh, if that's okay, because we know that you're going to get slapped like our wives are going to slap us today. Our Latin wives.
With the chanclas, guys.
Con la chancleta no van a pagar. Sabes que yo le quiero preguntar algo no relacionado a esto, porque bueno, somos coleccionistas y coleccionamos figuras, y nada, me gustaría saber desviarlo un poquito, porque como yo, que tengo mi oficina así, como vos que tenés la tuya, Charlie tiene la suya, Pelo tiene la suya, nos inspiramos mucho en nuestro lugar de trabajo, así que le quería preguntar un poquito si nos puede contar de su colección, si no les molesta.
Dale, sí, obviamente.
Josh, I'm going to detour a little bit of the conversation that we're having because, well, again, this is my office. This is my world. Sergio has his own. Charlie has his own. Pelu, who I don't know what happened, he couldn't join, has his own place where we work. And you mentioned that you're a collector too. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because we get inspiration for everything that surrounds us and inspires us to work and have the energy to work every day. So I wanted to ask you about your collection. I don't know, great grail piece is the word, because I'm sure you have something, but what are your collections right now, Josh?
Well, I collect a number of things, which my wife loves, but you know, I collect comic books. I collect science fiction novels, science fiction and fantasy novels, and pulp magazines. I think science fiction paperbacks in general, I think, are actually the most overlooked collectible right now. I wonder if in the future we're going to look back and be like, wow, you could have gotten all that for nothing, because the amount of money you spend for the amount of happiness a good book can bring you is unbelievable, in my opinion. So I love collecting science fiction and fantasy novels. I love collecting toys, of course. You know, I have to be careful because of space, but, you know, I got very lucky recently. A coworker of mine sold me his 1980s toy collection, which had almost a complete run of complete loose Transformers and G.I. Joes and Star Wars and a lot of really amazing Dungeons and Dragons. I got very lucky, but I collect all that stuff. And of course, I collect Motu, and I've gotten lucky with Motu as well. You know, I live in California now. In California, a lot of people have worked on Motu, past and present, you know, for Mattel and stuff. And there's a lot of stuff out here and a lot of collectors. So I've fallen into some amazing Motu stuff. So it's really great. I love it. But those are the things that I collect. I do have Grail pieces, of course, but more and more as I get older, I'm less interested in this piece that's so valuable. You know, don't get me wrong, I would love like $1 million comic book or something, you know, or you know, and I strive to write one and stuff. But what really is the adventure that it takes you on, and the adventure of getting it, to me, is really exciting, you know.
Thank you so much for that. Dice, bueno, colecciona muchas cosas. Dice, bueno, obviamente mi esposa me ama por eso, ¿no? Estamos todos igual. Cómics, revistas pulp, revistas y paperbacks de ciencia ficción, los libros de bolsillo de ciencia ficción. Me pregunto cómo va a ser eso en el futuro, porque dice, con el poco dinero que cuesta comprar unos libros de ciencia ficción, las ediciones de bolsillo, y lo rico que puede llegar a ser leer contenido, inspirarse y estar inmerso en ese universo con tan poca plata. Dice, tuve suerte con lo que se refiere a juguetes, porque hace poco un compañero de trabajo le vendió una colección completa de los 80s, casi completa, dice, y en la colección hay Transformers, He-Man, las Tortugas Ninja, G.I. Joe, y dice, bueno, tuve también mucha suerte con Motu, porque estoy en California, mucha gente trabajó en He-Man aquí en California y hay muchas cosas de coleccionistas. Dice, tengo algunas piezas que son los Holy Grails, pero no es algo que me preocupe en este momento tener el ítem más caro, más raro. Me encantan, me dice, no me malinterpretes, me encantaría tener un cómic de $1 millón, pero la aventura de todo esto es conseguir los ítems, ¿no? Cazarlos. Que es hermoso no conseguirlo en eBay y conseguirlo en una juguetería en el medio de Ascochinga. Hermoso.
Tal cual, tal cual. Si hacemos una última pregunta, ¿te parece?
Vale. Ya lo dejamos libre.
The last one. A ver si la podemos. Él nombró mucho los cómics ingleses. Está no sé si él conoce la Biblia de Halperin, que se abrió, bueno, en base a todo lo que fue apareciendo en historias, después en 2000X, Nuevas Aventuras, a veces hay distintos orígenes de personajes y demás. ¿Qué tomaría él como canon? ¿O se nutre de todo, o a lo largo de todo lo que leyó dice, no, mi dirección es ir por acá? Esa es la primera parte de la pregunta. Y la segunda es si tiene alguna info o algo de lo que se viene luego de la película.
Ok. Seguro que sí, y seguro que no va a poder hablar.
Vamos a ver.
Sería hermoso. Okay, so I think that we're going to finish with those two questions that he has. But I'm curious about something. You're a science fiction collector and you enjoy novels. So who's your favorite author, if I can ask you? That is for me.
Oh, that's really tough. I have so many, but off the top of my head, I love Harlan Ellison. I love Isaac Asimov. I love Philip K. Dick. I love Philip K. Dick, of course, wrote Blade Runner and Total Recall. Yeah. I love. I'm reading. He just died, and I'm just really getting into his stuff, and he just died, which makes me sad. So I never got to meet him. But Barry Longear, he wrote Enemy Mine, but his short fiction's incredible. I mean, Octavia Butler is amazing. Ursula Le Guin's amazing. There's a lot of new authors on the scene. There's a guy named Martin Shoemaker who I've learned so much from, and I'm reading his stuff. every chance I can get. I read a lot of short fiction too. I think that sometimes a short story can be so much more powerful than a novel. And I think that sort of reading is what prepared me to do mini comics at all and to write anthology stories. I write a lot of short science fiction short stories as well, and fantasy short stories as well. But many authors, I can send you a list. But those are just some of the ones off the top of my head.
Charlie, perdón que te secuestré la pregunta, pero estaba esperando un bullet point ahí. Perdón, antes de seguir con la pregunta de Charlie, le pregunté, bueno, como él es coleccionista y lector de mucha ciencia ficción, ¿cuál era su autor favorito? Y obviamente me dijo que tiene muchísimos. Harlan Ellison, Philip K. Dick, que es el escritor de Blade Runner, Isaac Asimov, ahora dice que está leyendo mucho de Barry Longyear, que es el que escribió Enemy Mine, que falleció hace poquito. Octavia Butler, bueno, nuevos autores como Martin Shoemaker, que escriben muchas historias cortas que pueden ser mucho más ricas que una novela larguísima.
Claro.
Dice que él escribe también muchísimo corto de ciencia ficción.
What I'm also getting into is not just reading vintage science fiction, because it can get very easy to lost in them, but I'm trying to read my current generation of writers also, and seeing who breaks through and what new discoveries they make in their short stories. And a lot of those short stories that are coming out, that's the very edge, it's the bleeding edge, new things that are coming out, because that's where the field is growing. So to me, that's really exciting too.
Bueno, nos estaba comentando justamente que no lee solamente cosas viejas, sino cosas de escritores actuales de esta generación para ver los nuevos descubrimientos que hay. Dice, es muy fácil perderse en una historia de ciencia ficción de los 80s, pero le gusta ver leer historias contemporáneas nuevas que van saliendo y ver cómo se va desarrollando el campo, ¿no? Bueno, y ahora...
Ya que estamos, ¿está mirando Alien Earth?
Claro, Alien.
Oh, okay, now... Are you watching Alien Earth?
Of course.
What do you think about the last episode?
It was interesting. The last episode is interesting. Visually, Alien Earth is just incredible, of course. Yeah. And the premise, the game board that they set up is very interesting as well. And, you know, the thing about the Alien universe that I like is even when it's bad, it's interesting because you just care, right? Because the property reached that level, right? Like Spider-Man. They can do a bad Spider-Man story and you're still probably going to watch it because you like Spider-Man, right? And Aliens is kind of like that. What I will say, which is separate from your question, is what's upsetting to me right now is a lot of new ideas cannot come to movies or TV now because everything is so franchised, right? And I love franchises. I write for He-Man. I love this stuff, right? But the problem is when you have a new idea, it has to go through Star Wars or Aliens if they're going to make a movie, or it has to really be a big bestseller that they're going to get millions of people and they're going to make tons of money, right? Which I understand, it's a business. But to me, that's why reading science fiction short stories is where you get the new ideas that don't have to be filtered, that can be truly new. That's really cool, right? And of course, you read science articles too, or things that are growing in technology, because sometimes right now, I love science fiction and fantasy, but the most exciting part of science fiction is not actually in stories, in my opinion. The most exciting part of science fiction right now is its current intersection with reality and the fortunes being made and new technologies coming out right now as we speak. There's so much change happening right now that it's scary, but also very exciting and interesting. And that's why I feel like science fiction is the most important genre, because every day it's more and more relatable, like compound interest, right? The problems of science fiction are our problems of today. And hopefully we find the answers there.
Absolutely. I froze for, 5 seconds, and I lost 5 seconds, but I got the train of thought right away when you jump. If there was a gap, I'll check it and let everyone know. Dice que visualmente y el tablero que presentan de juego le parece fabuloso en el mundo de Alien. Hasta el malo, el bicho malo, te interesa cómo se desarrolla, porque te interesa la propiedad. Dice lo mismo que hicieran un Spider-Man malo, te va a interesar porque te interesa Spider-Man y la propiedad. Dice que, bueno, la parte, ahí me perdí un par de segundos, le interesa mucho la idea de como todo lo nuevo que va saliendo, las nuevas tecnologías, se van mezclando con las historias de ciencia ficción y cómo se van interlazando, logrando una nueva ciencia ficción, porque no es fácil perderse en una historia de antes, que no existía esta tecnología, pero ahora existe esa tecnología, hay que llevar las cosas un poquito más allá, y que, bueno, le encanta eso de Alien Earth, y todos los cortos de ciencia ficción en particular que puede sacar ese tipo de información. Y ahora sí, me meto de cabeza en la doble pregunta de Carlos. Perdón por el detour. So Josh, okay, two-parter, last question, and then we'll let you go in peace to your
wife. Can you explain everything I said about science fiction and all that other stuff, though? It sounded short.
I need you to add 3 or 4 more seconds to it. I'll add it later.
All right.
Okay. So, I'm sure when you were doing your research, you have the Halpering Bible, the UK comic books. So, in layer of everything that you read, 2000X, New Adventures, different characters in Origins, what would you take as canon for the Masters of the Universe story? Or do you take your own direction and you have your own canon? That's first part. And I think I lost you with the first part.
So what would I take? So you're saying, like, what is to me the truest canon, or would I only take my own canon?
Yeah, with different. For example, if you go to 2000X, you have some origin stories. Then you go to New Adventures, you have some other origin stories. The first mini comic book has a different origin story for He-Man. So what would you take as an origin story? If you do, of course. Maybe
yeah. The best way I can answer that, to be honest, is that it's all canon to a degree, because He-Man has reached the level beyond just, to me, right? He-Man has reached a level that's beyond primary canon. He-Man has reached the level of mythology. And like any mythology, there are multiple interpretations, right? Like if so to me, it's mythology level. It's mythological, right? In terms of its level of storytelling at this juncture. My favorite, though, is a different question. And what I will say is, the art I love in the original, I love the art in the mini comics now, of course, and I'm biased, obviously, but I love the mini comic art in the originals. I love the storybook art in the originals. But the story writing, my favorite story writing from He-Man is probably the 2000X series. I think the writing now and all this stuff is great, but the 2000X series is excellent. And I got to hang out with the show. I actually know Michael Halperin as well, who lives pretty close to me. I should call him, right? And I know I got to hang out with Dean, his last name, Dean Stefan, who is the story editor of the 2000X series. And I got to hang out with him before I ever knew I was going to work on He-Man. And I told him, I said, I went for coffee with him because I was writing for animation and trying to, break in even deeper at the time. I said to him, he said, Josh, I did interviews on the 2000X DVDs. And I said, did the studio ever pay you? And he goes, nah, I just wanted to do it as a volunteer. And I said, why did you do that? You should have gotten to it. But years later, he died, which was very sad. But thank goodness he did those interviews, because I got to listen to them in the commentaries of the DVDs, and I felt like I was right with him in the writer's room. And thank goodness he created the record. And that's what made me want to do more records, like interviewing with you guys, right? Because I feel like it's important to create records of this sort of stuff. So I guess we're making history here, guys. That's what I'm really trying to say.
I love you. There you go. I love you. There is just another second part of that question. I'll go ahead and translate this one. And the second part, I think, is going to go in the realm of that's it, guys. But yeah, we'll see. Dice que la mejor forma de contestarlo es que todo es canon en este momento. He-Man está más allá de un canon primario, llegó a un nivel que se podría llamar mitológico. Como toda mitología, tiene diferentes interpretaciones. Dice, para mí, en nivel de historias y todo lo que es favorito, repito, para mi gusto personal, el arte de los minicomics originales es lo que más le gusta. Y después, con lo que se refiere a escritura, todo lo que es 2000X. Dice, para mí la obra de obra es muy buena, pero esa obra es genial. Dice, justamente Michael Halperin, que vive acá cerca, podría llamarlo ahora mismo, me juntaba con él antes de laburar para He-Man, y un día le dijo, cuando vio los DVDs y los comentarios en los DVDs y en entrevistas, dice, che, pero ¿te pagaron por hacer esto? Y dice, no, le preguntaron, ¿te pagaron por la entrevista esto? Y dice, no me pagaron, pero él trata de que quede todo asentado y todo guardado en los libros para futuras generaciones que vean y tengan estas entrevistas y digan, che, esto vale la pena, esta información necesito. Y bueno, Josh dijo, chicos, estamos haciendo historia nosotros acá con esta charla.
Vamos.
Y ahora voy a ir a la última parte de la pregunta de Charlie, que va a ser la que seguramente nos corte en internet. Es venir después de la película.
Vamos a ver.
Si tiene algo que pueda compartir con nosotros. So, Josh, there's a new Masters of the Universe movie coming right now. And Charlie wants to know, we all want to know, the whole Masters of the Universe fandom wants to know, do you know anything that is going to be happening right after that?
Guys, honestly, you probably know more than me. I know you're going to hate that answer, but I'm telling you, I often get the news last. There have been times where I'll have the Toy Channel Toy Habits, and I'll be watching their news about He-Man, and they're talking about stuff that they think is going to release that I didn't even know about, and then like a week later, I get the assignment on the thing they broke the news about. But what I will say is I'm very excited. I am very excited. I don't care if you guys think that's lame. It's the truth. That's the truth.
No sé si necesita traducción, pero la voy a decir por si hay alguien que está escuchando que no lo sepa. Chicos, ustedes saben más que yo. Yo recibo las últimas noticias, las veo primero en Toy Habits y después, una semana después, me dicen a mí que lo tengo que hacer. Las figuras que van a sacar y todo las veo primero ahí, después me lo avisan a mí una semana después. Así que lo que sí voy a decir es que estoy muy emocionado por lo que se viene de He-Man y todo lo que va a salir. Así que estamos todos igual, me parece, en ese caso. Así que bueno.
Todos en el mismo barco estamos.
Todos en el mismo barco, corremos. Le damos la despedida a Josh.
Dale, sí.
Josh, thank you. We love you. We love your work. And we look forward to seeing a million more mini comics coming from you. And why not something pretty big with a huge story? I know you love short stories, but something pretty big like an omnibus with all of your stories.
Oh, that would be amazing. And yeah, I would love to write any of the Motu stuff. And I just love writing in general. And what I want to say is that my favorite part that I'm discovering about Motu is actually the community. It's a global, incredible, passionate community. I hope that this movie will make it grow even more and continue it for more generations. And I'm hopeful and believe it will. And I just want to say, like, we have the power, guys. You guys make it worthwhile. The stories wouldn't matter unless we had people reading and collecting and caring. So I want to thank you guys. I actually have a million questions for you guys, but I got to get home before I turn into a pumpkin and my wife kills me. No, I'm just kidding. She loves me. But she says hola. And I just want to say thank you guys so much. Let's definitely keep the conversation going. I'd love to do it again because I have questions.
Oh, love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cuando quiera lo hacemos.
Anytime you want, we'll do it again.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. And one last thing. Again, there's so much great work coming out of Argentina, whether that's customs or the artists. Oh my gosh, so many great artists. I'm sure you heard of this guy named Axel. Anyway, really great stuff. You guys like interview him like once a week over here? He's like this, he's huge over there too, right? So
yeah, we know Axel. Well, I don't know if you had a chance to look at some of the.
While he does all the interviews with you guys, is that?
Claro.
So you do know him then. Of course. I don't know if you were able to check some of the guys that we were able to have chats with. Yeah, we spoke with a lot of people from, the creator of He-Man, producers, the director, writers, artists. So yeah, it's our world. That's so you're part of it too. You're one more link in this.
Well, I'm really excited to check out the library of interviews and have it play on YouTube and the TV and stuff. So I'm really excited. Well, I've got to get going. I really appreciate you guys. Again, reach out. Oh, one last thing. Can I do a couple plugs real quick? Sorry, before I forget.
Please.
For anyone who doesn't, please add me on Instagram. Feel free. I love seeing fans post. I love posting stuff about He-Man and all the stuff we talked about. So feel free to follow me at Joshua Skywriter. So it's just my name, Joshua Sky, the word writer, for Instagram. And I've got stuff coming out. Not only do I have a bunch of mini comics that I'm excited about, but I have some comic book projects. Some of the latest issues of Heavy Metal relaunch, 1 through 3, I've been writing on, and I should be writing on subsequent issues. I have a short story coming out in an anthology called Forbidden Futures, issue 14. And I hope to have a collection of my original, a complete collection or near complete collection of all of my original science fiction stories that I've written up to this point. Some of them were really hard to get because we actually had to get the rights from some publications that they passed through. So definitely be on the lookout for that this year. And there's some other cool comic projects that I can't even talk about yet, but I'm just really excited. And I hope you guys join me on the journey.
Absolutely. And we will chat with you some of the time and soon, hopefully.
Cool.
Traduzco rápido antes de que se vaya Josh y le damos después los abrazos. Que ama la pasión global que tiene He-Man. Espero que esta película haga crecer más y que futuras generaciones sigan creciendo. Y dijo, todos tenemos el poder, como en la serie
de Netflix.
Nueva de Netflix. Sí. La historia no importa si no están ustedes para absorberla y ponerse contentos con ella. Así que gracias a ustedes, muchachos, sigamos charlando. Estoy seguro que muchísimos artistas vienen de Argentina, como Axel Jiménez, que hace entrevistas, se dice, me encanta, y pide a la gente, ahí pusimos el Instagram de Josh, les pide, agrégueme, escríbame. Ahora tengo varios productos que van a estar saliendo nuevamente, reediciones de Heavy Metal, unas historias de ciencia ficción cortas, Forbidden Futures número 14, con historias de Josh, y pronto está trabajando en las historias completas de todas sus historias cortas de ciencia ficción, o casi todas sus historias cortas hasta ahora. Está con unos temas de derechos, pero bueno, síganlo y vean los cómics que se van a venir muy prontito. Ahí está el Instagram de Josh, lo vamos a poner en el canal de YouTube.
Thank you,
Josh.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank
Adios,
you.
guys. Talk soon, okay? All right, bye-bye.
Gracias, Josh.
Thank you,
Chao,
Josh.
chao.
Qué groso.
Muy divertido, sí, muy lindo los procesos creativos. A mí me interesa mucho siempre escuchar, por eso los Blu-ray y todo esto no es para ver la peli en mejor calidad, que la puedo bajar pirata, sino por el tema de las entrevistas y ver la parte creativa, cómo se desarrolla, me vuelve loco. Así que estuvo muy divertido esto.
Se quedaba, si no era por la mujer, se quedaba un tiempo más.
Estaba mirando mucho para el costado, se ve que estaban...
Sí, ya.
Pero fue más copado que Highlander, que hizo una mirada para el costado y dijo, chico, me voy.
Cualquiera fue más copado que Highlander, Gustavo.
Hasta ese momento estuvo muy buena, pero bueno, ya está demasiado emocionante ese día, ya no daba más conmigo mismo. Me puse pañal ese día para hacer la entrevista, imagínate.
Así que la verdad que linda sorpresa.
Muy buena,
sí.
Muy buena entrevista.
Sí. Muy amena y muy copado el flaco. Josh, el amigo. Así que bueno.
Josh es otro nombre,
Claro. Este es Dios.
Josh.
Le podríamos decir Mirta si queríamos, nos iba a querer igual.
Tiró una ahí que después le vamos a preguntar por privado.
Sí.
Tiró un nombre ahí que
sí.
dijo algo que, si hay buena onda, vamos a escribir a ver si nos puede hacer el contacto.
Dale, lo que quieras.
Sí.
Yo estoy acá empujando la carreta cuando quieran, donde quieran, la hora que quieran, misma batidora, mismo antecanal o diferente batidora, diferente baticanal, lo que quieran.
Sí, la verdad, gracias, como siempre, la trasnoche, gracias por estar a todos, muy amables. Se vienen cosas muy grosas y no sé, no vamos a decir más nada. Nada. Pero capaz que más rápido de lo que se imaginan. Así que bueno, estén atentos a las redes, al grupo.
Atento al canal. Claro.
Tenemos un lindo grupo de WhatsApp. Se hablan cosas, nos decimos buenos días, nos decimos buenas noches. Nos queremos mucho. La verdad que está bueno el grupo.
¿El espíritu de Pelu está dentro tuyo en este momento?
No,
¿Y qué le pasó al salvaje?
No pudo entrar. Volví al Pelu de las primeras transmisiones, que no tenía problemas con toda la tecnología.
Son todas señales que vamos a tener que volver a las bases.
Volver a las bases.
Pero
Sí.
bueno, estén atentos, que se vienen cosas lindas.
Ahí
Y
estamos.
esperemos que tengamos la intro como debe ser.
Todo muy bizarra, me encantó, boludo. Me encantó. Yo lo miro desde el punto de vista, ¿no?, de un invitado. Está bien, ya saben a dónde vienen. Saben que no estamos yendo a Canal 11 al prime time, ¿no? Saben que quieren hablar con un grupo de amigos que estamos sentados en una mesa charlando. Pero cuando ven la impresión de la tele, qué triste, boludo.
Somos Ultimate, motherfucker.
La tenemos así, mirá ahí la intro.
Sí. Sale esa la próxima. Acá está, mirá.
Y bueno,
Ay,
así, claro, así.
estuvo muy bueno. Muy bueno.
Bueno, muchachos,
Ay, Dios.
nos vemos quizás
Dale.
antes de lo pensado.
Hagamos fuerza
Sí.
porque la semana que viene aparecemos con algo muy grosso.
¡Opa!
Dale.
Gracias a todos, Lobo, José, Rowa, Gabriel, Pau,
Mati, Neo,
Lucho que anda por ahí, que le
Sergio,
el bus a bus, Ale,
Gonza,
también.
Ariel, así que...
El crédito
Pau.
argentino neterniano, Gonzalo Facio. ¿Qué me contás?
Sí.
Bueno,
Pau.
gracias a todos.
Nos estamos viendo, gracias por acompañarnos.
Así es.
Gracias, muchachos. Nos vemos. Un abrazo para todos.
Buenas noches.
Chau.